Now, without further ado, Jackie will present.
Exploration of visuality and its translation to materiality, the definition and position of vision, the image, and the observer changes across history, culture, and space. Vision can be understood today as the physiological ability in relation to a perspective. Image can be understood as a representation of a person or thing in a work of art or literature. So the value of the image is taken in the manifestation of the observer's perception in physiological terms. The power shift in the relationship between the image and its observer is ultimately defining our relationship to reality as we evolve and develop, which in turn influences design, spatial quality, and interaction. Throughout history, as we change our perception of the world and reality, so too does our vision and our ability to see. Whether through physiological standpoint or physiological adaptations and development, what we see now differs greatly from that of past generations and will differ to those of the future. We have the eye as a measure of the world. Traditionally, our understandings of the city and the world around us was defined and conveyed by artists. The introduction of perspective in paintings empowered the artist's position and led to the development of the camera obscura, or the original and first camera. This method of capturing an object through an exposure drew truth from a focal viewpoint and separated the empty interior of the mind to the surrounding world. The power of the camera obscura was in condensing the perspective into a single viewpoint. Artists and photographers would represent the object or place from one perspective, and the resulting image is then digested by the audience as a true representation of that object. Power is given to the artist as their representation is understood as an objective perspective. As a complex technique of power, it was a means of legislating for an observer what constituted perceptual truth, and it delineated a fixed set of relations to which an observer was made subject. With the 19th century and further studies into the physiology and anatomy of the eye and the brain, the relationship between the observer and vision was redefined. The body became viewed as a visual producer. Our individual perceptions are empowered as they are valued with respect to an individual's experience. As each individual has different physiological relationships to reality, so too does their perception of reality differ. Our ability to measure, as well as the subjects we choose to measure and focus on, will change as we are exposed to new levels of awareness. As possessors of the eye, we have a role as the observer to decipher the transition between object, vision, and the image. We are the navigators and pioneers of perspective and of the consequent perception. If I were to define our role today, we are the hosts of the physiological and psychological manifestations of reality. Metabolitic phenomenology teaches and coaches us in remembering the role of the seer. It is construction of our context and cultural historical world, made up of our expectations of the body and its experience and relationship to the world. In other words, it's like our subconscious relationship to experience and encapsulates the mindless relationships we make in our lives. A simple example can be from what Ash was talking about yesterday. So if I told you to think of a chair, each and every one of you would think of an individually unique chair based on your own experiences and relationship to chairs. This relationship between the seer and the seen turns into a situation where the world is reflecting the individual. The image that the observer sees is a reflection of the viewer and a personal reality. Brunelleschi's theory of the mirror is explored through the works of L. Home when he states, "It is this reciprocal function of me looking at the world and the world looking at me that structures the subject of perception and the visible world. The subject is thus a montage." So, if the subject is now a montage, it has formed an interdependency on the observer for its existence. Without the observer, how real can the reality be? Anamorphosis is a play with perception, a play with the observer and their relationship to the object through interpretation. The image is a distortion of the socially defined truth of an object or place. an example of which is the Ambassador's painting by Hans Holbein. Though seemingly like a traditional portrait, what seems to be an odd-looking smudge over the bottom of the image is actually a skull, which can be seen and understood only from a particular vantage point. Instead of the single understanding drawn from one perspective, by forcing the viewer to approach this painting from another physical standpoint, this anamorphically distorted skull highlights the fact that truth and meaning can be drawn from the painting from multiple perspectives. Even within a single individual, multiple understandings can be taken from this painting. Diamorphosis is an exploitation of this distorted perspective with the introduction of a digital tool to manipulate the image in order to render the origins untraceable. The sculptural work of Robert Lazzarini can be seen as an example of this digital introduction. From his 2000 exhibition, the piece named Skulls are laser-cut sculptures made from digital modelling programs and mounted on the wall. As one inspects the piece, though it resembles a skull, the form cannot be made sense of from a visual perspective. Only through the digital realm can the process of the distortion be made understood. Payphone is another example of this. As architects, it is with an understanding of this critical analysis of the image and vision that we are responsible for designing and producing architecture and space that can represent the relationship between the observer and the image. We come to design space that is a reflection on our context, politically, socially, and economically. With a continuously shifting power relationship, we have a responsibility to be aware of society's standpoint in order to produce relevant design. The concept of non-place architecture is, as Hansen would say, designed to trigger a bodily response and thus to reinvest the body as a privileged site for experience. The works of Craig Carpackagian, for HVAC for example, are of images and digital paintings of ventilation systems, ducts or corridors, and are portrayed in order to induce the spatial sensations and experience one may encounter when confronted with this space. The works are a critique on how we can feel such feelings of claustrophobia or vertigo without physically inhabiting the space. We learn to satisfy our spatial needs with our psychological reality, where metabletic phenomenology steps in unconsciously and reminds us of how we relate to the world, in this case, via a digital image. As architects, we can understand this relationship and reconsider the necessity of spatial form making, whether our satisfaction and relationship to the program within architecture needs to be represented through space. This is presenting an opportunity for us to decide, in the design development phase, a spatial hierarchy. We are given the responsibility to understand the psychological needs of the inhabitants of our buildings as well as the physical. Jean Reinhardt's work, entitled Inverted Spaces, is an exploration of the value of spaces that are usually perceived only from the inside. Effectively, he produces models of negatives of architecture. This is an example of how designers are beginning to represent spaces in different perspectives, taking a spatial quality approach. This volumetric approach to space can render designers with a new understanding of architecture, one that has separated form and spatial quality. This inversion of representing space shows that it is the form of the buildings or spaces that we design that must either encapsulate and enhance the spatial quality of the architecture within, or conversely, satisfy the psychological and physiological needs of the inhabitants that aren't represented through the space. This work by Reinhardt is also useful for us to develop a better understanding of our own design capabilities. In our analysis and understanding of the meaning of the image, of vision, and of the observer, we are given an opportunity to comprehend the significance of our relationship and interdependency of reality and the observer. The relationship, though ever-changing, developing and evolving through context, is one that will continue to influence the way we live. The relationship between vision and the image can be extended to a transition of object to vision, vision to individual, and individual to image. All of these depend and rely on each other to define the perceptions of reality, and in turn also defines reality itself. With these new understandings, we can explore the extents of the contemporary image, which Jess will now address in her presentation.